Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone. Today we're going to be doing another AX8 tone match patch. Say that 10 times fast. We're going to be tackling another one of my personal favorites, Amon Amarth. So Amon Amarth are pretty well known for popularizing this subgenre of death metal called melodic death metal. And a lot of people call them Viking metal because of the melodic nature, and their lyrics and imagery have to do with Norse mythology and Viking culture. So they've really made quite the image and the sound based off of it. I don't know exactly what Norse music sounded like. I imagine it had a lot of pan flutes and lutes and stuff like that, but I imagine if they listened to heavy metal back then, it would sound like Amon Amarth. Because of that, I am a big Norse mythology nerd, and that definitely helps my love for the band. But I've always really enjoyed their music, and I really like their guitar tone, even though it's not something that I would ever personally use for my own stuff. I always thought it was pretty creative, yet really refined, really simple for the stuff they do. So today we're going to be trying to match it in the Fractal Audio AX8. Before we get to that, guitar. I'm using my trusty Epiphone Les Paul, and this will be basically perfect for what we're trying to do because the guys in Amon Amarth, Johan and Olavi, play Gibson Explorers, and I think Johan plays a James Hetfield Snakebite signature Explorer knockoff from ESP. Same thing. I'm fairly certain they use similar pickups and has the same scale length. So as long as you have a 24 and 3/4 inch scale guitar with passive pickups, you'll be able to nail the Amon Amarth sound. The only strange thing they do as far as guitars goes is they tune down to B. Not drop B, just B standard. I don't have thick enough strings to really be doing this, to tell you the truth, but I didn't feel like changing them just for one video because I am playing some other stuff on this currently. So I would use somewhere in the neighborhoods of, I don't know, 52s on up. Depending on the tension you like, but I think I have like 46s, and it's barely cutting it. These high strings just aren't going to do it. So try something that'll give you enough tension that can hold that really low sound. But nothing really complicated. Just something like this will do you. Actives will work. Won't sound quite the same, but they will work if you have to do it. So with that, let's get on to some Ax8 Edit Magic. So booting up here into Ax8 Edit, you can see that this is actually a fairly simple signal chain, and I'm using some effects that under normal circumstances for personal use I would probably never use, but it does contribute to Amon Amarth's pretty unique lead sound. I'm talking specifically about the tremolo and the phaser here. So I'm going to start on scene 2 in this patch. I'm only going to be using 2 scenes, and the rest of it I would control via the foot switches on the pedal board itself, the same way that Johan and Olavi would do live. They've got very simple pedal boards. They don't use but a few effects, and they record with Kempers. They play with amp heads and stuff live. So to get their death metal sound, it really actually isn't all that complicated. So we're going to start here with our more modern sound. This is based off of a PV6505 Plus rig, and this is kind of the sound they've been going for since around 2006. I also have their more classic sound covered in this patch as well. We'll get to that momentarily. So starting off from the get-go, we'll skip these disabled effects for now. We'll just talk about the rhythm tone. So we're going to start off with a classic Tube Screamer 808. They use a Maxon 808, and I've dialed in the settings basically the exact same way they would have it. It's your modern metal version of a Tube Screamer. You kill the drive, level all the way up, and they don't turn the tone to 10. They leave it at about a little before 3 o'clock, according to the pictures of their pedal boards. The tone knob being in this position is actually fairly critical. This will cut off some of the more crunchy frequencies going into the amp, and that contributes to a little bit more of a smooth death metal guitar sound than, you know, chug, chug, chug sound, which is definitely something that they're well known for in all of their albums, not just their more recent ones. So we're going to be sticking with this throughout the entire patch. So for their modern amp, like I said, we're going to be using the PVH 6160 Plus lead, which is the 6505 Plus by PV. It's their 5150 after their contract with Eddie Van Halen went up, basically. Great versatile metal amp. I don't use them a whole lot for my own stuff, but there's a reason that they are so prominent in heavy metal, and I think it's obvious why Amon Amarth uses them now. They sound fantastic, and I have this dialed in pretty much exactly how Amon Amarth would do it. I've seen live pictures of their rig, and yeah, this is what they would do. Their input drive, I think the pre is what would be called on the real amplifiers, only at 4.5. I thought that wasn't quite high gain enough, and there's a million variables why that might be between the lower output pickups I'm using. This is digital, not everything's going to translate 100%, blah, blah, blah. So play with these numbers as you want, but I figured just to get a little bit more authenticity to the sound, we're going to stick with you know, using their same dialed in settings. And then for the cab, I've got a 5153, well, it's a 5150, and then a that's using an SM57 and a 4x12 just generic V30 speaker. And there is a 6160 impulse response, but I found it to be a little bit too dark. And what you'll hear with all their guitar tones, which sound, this is going to sound something like this. It's not super scooped, but it does have a bit of scoop to it, and a lot of these bass fractal audio impulses I find are fairly dark and have a good bit of mid to them, and that's what I like, because I would prefer to, you know, kind of EQ out the stuff I don't want later instead of having to add brightness and bottom end. But this does tend to get the job done pretty well, so I definitely wanted a 57 because of the bright sound. And I'm not entirely sure what microphone combination was used with this. I'm guessing some type of more neutral compressor mic. Either way, I think they do use 2 microphones per cab live, so that's what I went with here, just to try to get, you know, mimic that sound a little bit. And truth be told, I really don't care for their live tone all that much. I think it's, I don't know, maybe it's just all the live shows I've heard. I've never seen a show of theirs, just to tell the honest truth. I've only seen videos of shows of, you know, like Walking Open Air or whatever. And their guitars always sound like that Line 6 pod, it was cool in 2002 type sound. But they're just really blubbery, no definition. And like I said, this could have been a problem with the show itself, but that's why I'm not terribly concerned with matching impulse responses and exactly how they do it here, because otherwise I'd have to EQ it later. So this is a bit of a hybrid between what they would do live, what they would do in the studio, just trying to get that basic Amon Amarth sound. And it's going to change a little bit from album to album. So Twilight of the Thunder God was a lot darker. You could crank this and lower this a little bit for more Twilight sound. What's another weird one? Deceivers of the God, or Deceiver of the Gods. That one is a really strange sounding album for them, because it was, the mix was much more live sounding, And for that, you're going to have to play with these, you know, the EQ and everything if you're trying to nail the Father of the Wolves sound. But otherwise, this setup should get you more or less the modern Amon Amarth sound from With Odin on Our Side on up. So the next thing we're going to talk about is their more old school sound, and this is the basic sound from their demo albums up through Fate of Norns in 2004. And as you'll hear, that's not exactly what I would call a great guitar tone. In fact, I think that's anything but good. On its own, it's kind of terrible. I'm an owner of a rectifier amp, and I can tell you for sure, this is a bad rectifier sound. But it works. It really does work for them. This is one of those instances where I can say, I don't like the sound, I don't like the tone, but it doesn't sound right any other ways to my ears, because that's the way I've always listened to their songs. And this is kind of a case where, at least in my opinion, with the band, that I wasn't a huge fan of their sound on their earlier stuff, at least around the early 2000s, but I love their songwriting. I think it was unmatched. I think even some of their more brilliant stuff around 2006 and 2008 was like the sweet spot for me, where the tone was great, the production was great, the songwriting was fantastic, and now it doesn't quite have the same spirit, but the production value's amazing. Whereas back then it was like, oh, good God, this sounds like a demo tape black metal group, but the songs are so good and so catchy that it works. And, you know, if that's what you're going for, this works great. To me, I was never into the whole cult sounding, oh, it's supposed to sound like crap. I don't want it to sound like crap, but for whatever reason, this works, at least in my opinion. So this is another case where I kind of tried to average the sound among those albums. So we're talking Versus the World, Fate of Norns, even up down through Once Sin from the Golden Hall. Like, this is a fairly big time period that I tried to get into one sound. So it's going to be a little too bright for some of the albums, going to be a little too dark for some of them, going to be a little too high gain, going to be a little too smushy, but overall it gives you that general rectifier sound they were using back then. And I don't have picture references of these, so this was dialed in by ear, and my first assumption I made was that they were going to use the same general tone on the tube screamer, so I kept that the same. It ended up working out pretty well, I think. Not using a whole lot of drive, and some of this was used from just being a rectifier owner, so you gotta crank the presence and treble quite a bit to get that kind of smushy high end. And because it's a fizzy beast, you gotta kind of kill the bass a little bit. And mids were basically non-existent on those albums, which is kind of cool. It kind of worked because the bass was filling in a lot of that on, especially like Versus the World. I think it sounded amazing. But yeah, so that's what I did for the amp. And then for the cabinet, kind of same deal. I felt like it worked just fine with just a rectifier and a single SM57. Perhaps they used more, perhaps they didn't, but it works okay. And you can always EQ it afterwards to get, you know, more of one album sound versus the other. So for the effects, this is what we're using. This is what they would use on their pedal board, at least like Johan, I know, uses a tremolo, or a vibrato rather. There is no vibrato listed in here, so this is the closest thing. All of these are copies off of real pedals that, again, I'm just kind of dialing in based off what I think they use on, or at least what songs they use them on, because I don't know when they engage them and when they don't. I'm going to assume that pretty much all the leads have some type of delay. I can tell which ones use the phaser, so like, say, War of the Gods. So, like, for sure on that lead, I know he uses a phaser there because it gives you kind of a wah sound, and he doesn't have a wah pedal, so it has to be a phaser. So this other stuff like delay is probably fairly mild, I would imagine, but you know, might go something like this. And then for the tremolo vibrato, I'm assuming they use these for kind of the clean parts and maybe to add a little bit of chunkiness to intros, like they do with the phaser. So one specific part I can think of, and using all three of these, would be the intro to this song. And like I said, I'm not for sure they use all of that. I'm not sure how saturated it is within the effects loop either. So making some assumptions here, and you're free to dial in and change the, you know, everything on these settings as you see fit. But that's basically Amon Amarth. Their guitar tone is really not that complicated. They use fairly stock, run-of-the-mill, you know, equipment that you could buy right now, and it's not that big of a deal. You can get a lot of this stuff used if you were just trying to go for that sort of melodic death metal sound. And I do think it is misleadingly simple because they play such and same thing with their actual musical chops. It is not that hard to play, but there is something kind of intricate about it that they managed to execute that makes it just wrap up in such a cool package that really no one else is doing. So that's why I've always been a fan of their work and kind of their tone. Not even though it's not something that I would directly emulate. I think, well, besides making a freaking video of it, but it was definitely fun going back and trying to tone match a lot of my favorite Amon Amarth songs, and I think I got fairly close, at least trying to get a wide range of sounds in one preset. So yeah, if you have any suggestions, please leave them below. Let me know if you find success with this, if you have a similar guitar to test it out with, and leave more suggestions for tone matches in the future. I've got plenty in the pipeline, but suggestions will never hurt. So hope you enjoyed that. Appreciate you watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.